Hello? Is my refrigerator running? What? Oh, we're rolling?
Yeah.
It's Coffee Talk. Settle in. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of Coffee Talk. I'm Tim. Thanks for tuning in, or should I say logging on. And if you don't know, this is Coffee Talk, a safe space where we're going to be facilitating meaningful conversations about life and about faith. And we hope these talks will challenge you, encourage you, and inspire you. Now, I think we'd all agree that this past year has been filled with a lot of struggles. Our lives have been surrounded by so much uncertainty, and despite the chaos, I'm confident that we're going to see our way through it all together. Now, there may have been some highs and lows that you've experienced, that I've experienced. We've been sort of living, though, in the extremes, sort of like a pendulum from one extreme to the other. And if you're joining us today, we're going to have a discussion about lament. What is it anyway, and why am I experiencing it? Lament is sort of like that feeling that you can't quite explain. It's sometimes hard to verbalize, but it's definitely felt deep within our souls. And at the root of it all, I believe, is that you and I are experiencing in real time is grief. And it's connected to the sorrow and all the stuff that we've been missing out on over the past year because of COVID. So how can we help you process it all in the midst of it? Today we're going to hit on that topic. So settle in and grab your cup of coffee and join in on the conversation as we talk about lament. But before we dig deeper, let's lighten things up for a minute, press pause, and take 3. Roll the graphic. Let's start with take 1. What's the craziest thing people have done while sleepwalking? Maybe you've gotten up in the middle of the night to get a midnight snack or to prepare a meal. Maybe you took a joyride in a car. Let me share with you a couple of really crazy things people have done while sleepwalking. One is conducting an orchestra. Harry F. Rosenthal, a classical music enthusiast and part-time maestro, is a sleepwalker. And one night, his wife, Nadine, said that she heard some strange noises coming from the bedroom. Anyway, she brought the children in to see, and she went ahead and recorded a video of him conducting an orchestra while vocalizing virtually all of the instruments. Harry was fast asleep and has no memory of the incident. Last but not least, the craziest thing I've ever heard someone's ever done while sleepwalking: mowing the grass. In 2015, a London woman caught her husband Ian mowing the lawn in his PJs at 2 a.m. She woke up hearing these strange noises in the garden. She went out to check to see what it was, and it was her husband. She hurriedly switched off the mower and went back to bed, and her 34-year-old husband had no idea what he was doing. He didn't even believe that he did it until she pointed out his dirty feet. What's the craziest thing you've ever done while sleepwalking? Hopefully nothing as awkward as that. Let's move on to take 2. Now, since this is Coffee Talk, I thought it would be good for us to explore what's the world's most expensive cup of coffee. Well, a Florida man named William Lewis broke the record last month, the most expensive Starbucks drink ever, when he ordered a grande latte that cost $83.75. What? That's right, you heard me right. And it contained 17 pumps of syrup, 101 shots of espresso, and 6,000 milligrams of caffeine. Now, incidentally, that's the exact amount of caffeine needed for any adult chaperoning a church lock-in with the youth group.
Sounds about right.
It's true.
It's true.
Seriously, though, 17 pumps of syrup? How do you take your coffee? Black with cream or with a bushel of sugar? All right, let's go to take 3. Last but not least, more cow news. Cow news!
Moo.
A cow broke loose in a hospital. It chased people down the hall. Now, I grew up in central Ohio, in farm country, and it wasn't uncommon to see an escaped cow running down the street, through town. And once, when I was a kid, I got chased by a bull through a graveyard. I had nightmares for weeks. Didn't sleep. Oh, and speaking of cows and coffee, what do you call a cow that drinks too much coffee? Over-caffeinated. This has been take 3. Well, today's topic is lament. Now, what is lament? It's a passionate expression of grief or sorrow. Now, I don't want this episode to be a downer. Remember Debbie Downer? But I do feel it's important that we take the time to process the things that we've been grieving, the things that have frustrated us or disappointed us. Yes, there have been many highs and lows as of late, and sometimes it does make us want to scream. But we can see a lot of examples through Scripture of godly men and women sort of crying out to God, naming their grief as a means of coping with their loss. Now that can be hard to do sometimes. To acknowledge our pain, our hurt. Lord knows we've missed out on so much lately during this pandemic, and we'll be grieving it for years. Now that word grief often accompanies loss. We often think of it with loss of life. That's the most obvious way we sort of express grief, I presume. But I think that we've been experiencing grief in a lot more ways too recently. And lament, that grief can sometimes creep into our lives when we least expect it. And if we don't take the time to cope and to process it all, it can sort of bottle up and bring about more pain, both to us and to those that we love. A recent poll stated that 71% of Americans expect this pandemic to have a lasting effect on the culture. And 87% said it has influenced their current living situations greatly. So let's name our collective lament, our grief, out loud. We've all been affected by this pandemic, and we'll be exploring a little bit more of the heartache and the loss here in a few moments, whether it be through our schools, the extracurricular trips and family activities, the work life that's been disrupted. Maybe it's felt like we've been treading water and the water has come up to our neck. But hopefully, we'll begin to see that these waters are receding, because hope is on the horizon. So let's dig deep into this tricky subject of lament, exploring what it looks like to process it correctly and to better understand how to deal with it when it comes up. But first, let's hear what you have to say. What were some of the experiences that you have had to deal with through this pandemic? What were some of those times when you had to cry out? Let's take a look.
I don't want to downplay the fact that this has been a horrible experience for so many of us. And, obviously people have had it pretty rough.
It sucks to not be able to give people a hug, to put your hand on someone's shoulder and tell them that God is present with them, to speak the words of peace through a mask. So, I want people to know that God is still with them in the midst of this. I need to find different ways of showing that.
Has there been any period of time in this past year where you've been angry because of what you've missed out on?
Well, I was not angry, but disappointed. I mean, I guess I go with, it is what it is. So I try not to get angry at things as much as accept them and try to make it to a good.
Do you think teenagers your age have been angry? Have they needed to kind of cry out through all this?
I mean, yeah, definitely. On the subject of actually taking your anger out, I've noticed there's been a lot more tenseness in the past year, I guess. It's been slowly increasing. It's not the greatest environment, and then that doesn't help with the way things run. It doesn't help with like the way some people think and their mental health.
I would add to that as a person of faith, every time, and there have been some low days for me over the last year, every time I feel like this can't even be real, like people have to be able to see outside of themselves, like this, then somebody does something that reminds me that there is still hope. And like one of those things was just recently we walked the neighborhood with the dog or whatever, and some family posted these or not posted, drew with sidewalk chalk, just like positive reminders. And I'm like, okay, like I can do this one more day, yeah. So let's not give up hope.
As things can get, there's always something better that will come out of it. As bad as things can get, there's still a lot of good things, and there's still a lot of good in the world, and you can still be optimistic about things despite all these lows that we keep reaching.
Yeah.
And it's easy to think that in the immediacy of something happening, it's easy to think, oh, everyone sucks, this isn't fun. But there are still some good things to outweigh it, which has been nice about COVID, is those have become more noticed. I think like those good deeds, those random acts of kindness that people probably still did before COVID, but now they're getting more noticed and perhaps becoming more common.
How have those elements of self-sacrifice actually helped you as an individual?
For me, it would have to go back to when I had cancer. And when I was going through that journey, and all the people that reached out to me, and how that made me feel so loved. That if I survived, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to send cards. I wanted to reach out and let people know we're thinking about you, we care about you. And so COVID didn't bring that out. Maybe it pushed it a little bit more. But for me, my journey and how that made me feel, I wanted to give that back to as many people as I could.
How have you seen a resiliency in the teams that you work with throughout this pandemic?
This generation of students will have the tools in their toolbox to face anything that comes their way. They will be the most adaptable, most resilient generation, and I'm thankful for that, because we need it, and we need to listen to their ideas, and we need to be ready to help make their ideas happen. I have seen kids come up with the most creative ways of doing things. In a world where it's so easy to hide behind screens, students are finding real ways to connect with each other face to face, which I'm not sure that would have happened, I'm seeing more students reach out and get the help that they need when they need it. And I'm seeing students rethink their futures in ways that they're putting the most important things first. And I'm very encouraged by that. Wow.
So when you look at these things, there's no guarantee. Today is a present, and you get today, will you get tomorrow?
Obviously, a lot of people have dealt with a lot of highs and lows over the past year, and people have probably dealt with a lot of loss or lament. Lament is a very churchy word. How would you guys define the word lament?
When you hurt your body physically, you cry out, ouch. So lament, I guess, is sort of your spirit or your heart when it aches. It's sort of a spiritual sort of ouch that you express your pain and your disappointment or your loss.
I guess
Right.
in today's terms, people would say I'm really hurting, hurting.
Instinctively, we are creative. I think that's part of our being created in the image of God. So I think being creative with hobbies and activities, things that sort of stimulate your mind, whether it's cooking or, whatever that you can do to be creative. I think that is helpful. I think key too is don't isolate yourself. I mean, even though we, have to shelter in place or social distance, we can still keep in contact with people. And I think too, sometimes there has to be, particularly with a disappointment with something, even related to the pandemic, I think sort of reevaluating or adjusting your expectations. And, just sort of standing back. And I think sort of kind of getting a big picture sort of perspective. Sometimes that's where others can help us. But I think just to ask our question, the simple questions like, well, will this matter in a week? Will it really matter to me in a month, a year? And just sort of, kind of readjust your perspective and your expectations.
Can you think of examples in Scripture where people have experienced loss or grief and how God guided them through that?
Well, certainly the person of Job from the Old Testament comes to mind right away. Everything imaginable was thrown at Job, and in the end, God protected him, didn't allow things to take his life, but he was allowed to suffer. But his faith brought him through it. And often we talk about the trials of Job, and that's an example of what I call stick-to-itiveness. If we stay the faith, if we continue to believe in God, and sometimes that's tough. Tough times call for tough faith, and sometimes we just have to faithfully tough it out.
Job never really knows why. That's, the question most people want to, have answered when they go through different, difficult times. But I think some of it's our innate wanting to control things and be in control is to kind of know the why. But sometimes, I've often thought that the why, not having the why question answered, requires the faith and the trust in God's goodness and in God's, mercy and God's grace.
Right.
But you're right. I mean, the Psalms are filled with lament. Often the words, I'm fainting, my bones are aching. There's, as Dale mentioned, this deep pain and sorrow that we feel when we lament. And surely, Jesus suffered loss and disappointment on a wide spectrum.
Sure.
In the Garden of Gethsemane, the night when Jesus was betrayed and arrested, they were coming to take him away to crucify him.
Right.
In Mark, which is one of the stories of Jesus' life, the Gospel of Mark, the 14th chapter, Jesus prays and cries out, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." So
I think the lesson is the Bible teaches us that even people of faith historically have suffered discouragement and depression and all of the human feelings that we feel. And yet they overcame.
Yeah. And I think getting back kind of the practical side of it, Tim, how can you help or what can people do? I think, seeking out somebody who has gone through similar difficulties to get their perspective and to just understand that, we're on a journey. The difficult time is only a part of that journey, that there is a long haul. There is that just because there's difficulties along the journeys doesn't mean that's where it's going to end.
This is a culture of relationships, and we need each other.
The fact that we have a God who became human, so therefore experienced the whole range of human emotions and feelings, so he can relate to us. He understands us. In fact, there's a passage in the book of Hebrews chapter 4, that says that we have a high priest who empathizes with us because he was tempted, experienced all the things that we experience as humans. And so for me, that's comfort, that God in heaven understands I suffer, when I grieve, when I lament, because he
Right.
experienced it himself.
God really does bring us through.
Well, thanks again, Pastors Don and Dale, and also we thank Tom and Debbie, Kelsey, and Micah again for sharing your wisdom and your experience on this difficult topic. And thank you all who chimed in on social media as well, as we're all striving to process out loud how this pandemic has affected us. Well, a few months ago, on a random warm November day, we gathered safely with students to discuss this topic of lament so that we could help young people name it out loud, the things that they've lost, to cry out to God in a fun way. And I bought a bunch of pumpkins in bulk. They were discounted after Halloween. And then we invited the students to write on them with Sharpies to list the things that they had missed out on because of COVID. And then we smashed those pumpkins all over the parking lot. And it was a fun way to sort of let off some steam after months and months of frustration. Because you know what? Sometimes it feels really good just to smash stuff. Safely, of course. I invite you to watch this brief video clip that I sent out to our students immediately after this event to remind them of what it means to lament, but then to also persevere. Take a look.
Hey students, I just want to give you a little update. The other day at our youth group outing, the first annual 2020 Stinks Let's Smash Some Pumpkins and Eat Junk Food Bash, we talked about lament. Now lament is a big word that you've probably heard before, but you probably don't exactly know what it means. And what lament means is to have sorrow or grief or regret for perhaps things in your life that you've lost. And we talked a little bit about lament and about the things in 2020 that we've sort of lost out on. You know, we've lost out on a lot of things. We're still sort of mourning and still trying to figure out exactly, you know, what we're experiencing. But students, you know, things aren't like they used to be. And so we talked a little bit about that. And we talked about, you know, what words or phrases come to mind when you think of lament. And we talked about, is it okay to cry out to God, or is it okay to feel lament, yes or no? And then sometimes, you know, we also then reflected upon the struggles that we have sometimes when things don't go the way we expected. You know, there's a whole book of the Bible called Lamentations. It talks all about lament. 1/3 of the Psalms deal with lament or crying out to God. There are 150 Psalms, so that means that 50 of those Psalms have to do with crying out to God and just sort of mourning and expressing from the heart one's concern. And you know, Jesus even expressed lament when he was in the garden before he went to the cross, and while on the cross he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So there are plenty of scriptures that talk about lament, and we had a discussion and we shared about, you know, why that's not unusual for us to have these emotions, you know. And think of that movie Inside Out. There were 5 different emotions. Do you remember that movie Inside Out? There were a lot of emotions expressed in that film, and certainly if you've watched that, you understand that as a young person, you go through the whole gamut of emotions, sometimes day to day. Sometimes you're angry, sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're sad, sometimes you're just kind of like chill. But then we did also then look at a couple of scriptures that were hopefully going to inspire us. And one was from Romans chapter 5, 3-5, and it says this: "Not only so, but we rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. But hope does not disappoint us, because God's love has been poured out upon us and into our hearts through the Holy Spirit whom he has given to us." Now, we all can understand what it feels like to suffer. Like I said, in 2020, we've suffered here and there in a variety of ways. What does it mean to persevere? Well, that means just to keep on trucking, or to keep at it. So we know that sometimes suffering can help us persevere, and that builds character within us. And then that character strengthens us and gives us hope. So I hope as you see some of the video clips of what we did when we smashed these pumpkins, we wrote down the things that we're lamenting on these pumpkins, and we then smashed them on the asphalt just for fun, to have a little fun and to acknowledge that it's okay to cry out. But I want you to think about, you know, how might something good come from your period of lament that you may have been experiencing this last year. And then meditate on this from 2 Corinthians 4:8. "We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. Even when we might be perplexed, we are not in despair, because God is with us." And that's the takeaway, that no matter what you're experiencing in life, that God is with you and that you are not alone. And it is okay to cry out and to lament. Peace out. Yeah, all right, rock on. Nice. Ah! Oh, that really smells. That stinks. Yuck.
Thank you all for tuning in again to this episode of Coffee Talk. No matter where you're viewing this, we hope that it's inspired you to face another day with joy in your heart. And when it comes to grief and these difficult topics, I hope you understand that we don't always get over it, but we can persevere through it. And how do we do that? By taking things one day at a time. And you can do the same. In fact, I know that we can all get through this because we're not alone in our feelings of remorse, lament, or loss. And no matter your age, young or old, I hope you'll remember that we're all in this together. Cue the High School Musical theme song. As usual, we like to give you 2 challenges for the week. The first one is this. I invite you to read 1 psalm a day for this entire week. I want you to explore the brutal honesty of these psalms that often cry out to God. And if you're feeling daring, you could then even rewrite a psalm in your own words. If you're not sure where to start, let me give you a few. Psalm 40, Psalm 91, or Psalm 4, or maybe Psalm 69. And the second challenge is I invite you to take a walk in silence, to soak up God's wondrous creation, and to embrace the beauty of a new day. And on that walk, feel free to cry out, to pray, to meditate, or just to be present. Embrace the moment that God has given you. Don't forget, connect with us on social media and on the web. We'd love to hear from you. And also, check out the link in the description of this YouTube video for show notes and a talk sheet that you can use personally, with your family, or in a small group. And remember, no matter what, be kind to one another. Peace. I'm out. This is hard work.
How do you say syrup? Syrup?
Syrup or syrup? Is it syrup? Is it syrup? Seriously though, 17 pounds.
Seriously?